Hello and welcome to The Late Show, your daily roundup of the salon. My name's Belle Donati, your host. Each day here on the show, we take a different category, a different theme, and we take a look at the salon and look at what's on within that theme or category each day. Every day you'll see certain pieces showcased here up close and personal. Today we're starting with classic and vintage watches. Earlier, I took a wander around the salon. Today's journey through the salon takes in classic and vintage watches. We're going to start here in the Carré des Horlogers. Now this is the space in the salon that's dedicated to independent artisan brands. First stop, Angelus. First of all, let's take a look at the Angelus Chronographe Médical 10 Masséna Lab. The Angelus brings its doctor's watch from the 1960s back to life. This 1-minute monopusher chronograph model with manual winding recalls the brand's functional watchmaking heritage. It can be used to measure the patient's pulse and respiratory rate, just like in the good old days. It features a 39mm stainless steel case, dual scale with pulsometer and asthmometer. And there's a single pusher chronograph caliber with small seconds at 9 o'clock. Next up, we have the Charles Zuber Perfos 42 steel-on-steel white dial. This sports watch has an original faceted case and white dial with embossed indexes. It displays contemporary elegance inspired by traditional watchmaking. The design of the dial, with its 60 polished triangular indexes, requires very high precision machining. It features an 8-sided 42mm stainless steel case with integrated bracelet, a dial with 60 reflective embossed indexes, and its automatic caliber with hours, minutes, and small seconds. Here is the Grönfeld 1941 Principia automatic cream lacquer dial. This 1941 Principia was the first Grönfeld watch to be fitted with a self-winding house movement. It's classically elegant and it bears the year of birth of the father of the two Grönfeld brothers. The saga of this watchmaking family began back in the 19th century. It has a 39.5mm case in red gold, cream lacquered dial with Roman numerals, and small seconds at 6 o'clock. Next up, the Panerai Radiomir Ottogiorni, PAM 01347. This Radiomir Ottogiorni fully embraces that vintage look. With its weathered appearance, it draws inspiration from the very first Radiomir prototype in 1935, which was 47mm in diameter. The model's characteristics are identically reproduced in a perfectly retro style. It has a 45mm cushion-shaped case in patinated recycled E-steel, 8-day power reserve, and sandwich dial with luminescent indexes. Our next stop is here at Spic Marin, where we're going to look at the new academic black tie, which is as classic as its name might suggest, and which doesn't forget the brand's British roots. This is the Spic Marin academic black tie. The academic model is Spic Marin's interpretation of the classic and elegant watch designed for everyday use. The small seconds set at 1:30 is an originality of the Maison. The motion work, punctuated by red figures, gives the model a British twist. It has a 42mm steel case, lacquered polished black dial with small seconds at 1:30, and 5mm raised luminescent black indexes with Roman numerals. Next up, Tudor Black Bay 54. Tudor pays tribute to its first diving watch, the Tudor Oyster Prince Submariner. That was made in 1954. This instrument watch has continued to evolve to meet the requirements of scuba diving. This year's Tudor Black Bay 54 recalls the original model with a 37mm case and a manufacture caliber. So it has that 37mm steel case, waterproof to up to 200 meters, unidirectional rotatable bezel, and luminescent indexes and hands. Next up, Zenit. We're here to see the Defy Revival Shadow, a watch that takes us all the way back to 1969. Finally, the Zenit Defy Revival Shadow. This Defy model by Zenit is a modern creation with a vintage silhouette. The watch combines the heritage of the very first version of the Defy, made in 1969, with a resolutely modern appearance. This Shadow version features a microblasted titanium case with an integrated titanium strap. The matte finish brings out the model's unique geometry. It has a 37mm octagonal titanium case with integrated bracelet, 14-faceted bezel, and indication of hours, minutes, seconds, and the date. All right, well, that was the flavour of classic and vintage here at the Salon this week. Now let's get into the detail. Actually, it's not even the detail. They've got the impossible task here of going into detail whilst also giving us the wide trends. So Andrew McCutcheon and Jeremy Agidone on the set with us. Thank you very much. Let's introduce you both. So Andrew, you're the founder of Time and Tide, which is one of the world's leading watch content publications. Before that, you were GQ's watch editor.
I was. It's going way back.
Yeah, welcome to the show. We've got to give you a whole life history. Jeremy, you're a designer. You're also the founder of Hole 19, which is West Africa's biggest luxury goods distributor. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, fantastic.
Correct,
all right.
correct.
Well, let's get into it. Welcome to the show. Jeremy, let's start with you. I'd love for you to try, because this is something we've been puzzling around here backstage. What is the difference between classic and vintage when we're talking about watches for you?
Before I even go into that, hello, Bella. How are you?
Hello.
I'm saying hello to my co-mate, Andrew.
How are you?
Doing? Great to be on this show. Bella, that's a really good one. What is classic? You know, what is vintage? Let's start with shrinking from 42 to 37. Once you shrink a watch, it starts to go vintage, right?
Yes.
Because if we go back, everything was 37.
Yeah.
So, the minute you do that, it's a start. I'll let Andrew go next.
Andrew, yeah, for you, what's the difference? Classic, vintage?
I'm going to go really simple. I think vintage just means old. Like vintage means something from the past, whereas classic, I think, is a bit of a, it denotes something that is timeless and it can be from now. So you'd say Belle's a classic. She's a classic. It doesn't.
Oh my goodness, stop.
But if I called you vintage, you'd be upset, right?
I would be upset because that's presumably auction house. So vintage is auction house.
Vintage is
right?
old. I think someone of your
But when you
vintage,
say old, let's be really clear.
Okay.
When you say old, that means it was made a long time ago.
I think vintage watches, by their definition, are older watches. Whereas a classic watch could be from any era. It could be from this year. We may say that the Tag Heuer 39mm glass box Carrera is a modern classic or an instant classic. So to me, there's a big differentiation between vintage and classic.
Okay, well, we've got that out of the way, which is great. Now let's talk trends. So let's take the Salon as a whole at the moment. Classic watches have been a bit of a trend over the last 2 or 3 years. Do you both see that trend continuing? Jeremy, let's start with you on that.
Well, classic, as Andrew said, you know, there's that big difference between the classic and then we've got this new word that comes in, neo vintage, neo classic. Yeah, it's a trend. Those big watches of 45, I'm talking about case sizes again now, seems to be way out. Everybody's shrinking from 42 to 40 to 39 to 37. So when you're getting to 37, it has to be classic, right? Even sports watches these days become a classic.
Do you agree with that? If it's that small, does it have to be a classic?
I don't necessarily agree to the note, but I do agree that the trend is towards smaller watches, which means, in fact, that we really coalesce with the classic era of the wristwatch, which is mid-century. So 1950s and onwards, we had 34mm watches for men, 32mm watches for men. So in actual fact, you know, again, that era of watchmaking is very much alive. It's more present than ever. So in some respects, he's right, but I think that the classic element, again, it comes down to definition. I could see a watch that was literally a modern design that you could say is a classic. So we might wrangle over this the whole chat.
No, let's not. We're definitely move on. But there's an interesting part to this as well, because of course, when we're talking about trends, it's what people are interested in.
Yeah.
With your expertise, I mean, you're in the business of selling. Are people interested in buying classic watches still?
Well, as you said at the beginning, I'm from the West African region. So every region has its own innuendos, you know. In Africa, we still like larger size watches. It's still considered anything above or below 37 is a female watch, you know. Yeah, but it's something that is very interesting that we will get over in the next 2 years. We'll see what the trend starts to be. But large watches is still the way to go in Africa.
So Derby not willing there to plant his flag there quite and just say whether it is a big trend. I don't know, Andrew, are you feeling more... I mean, I know we're only on day 2 of the salon, but are you a bit more confident about saying whether you think classic watches could be a trend this year?
Look, I think this is a great topic for the discussion for this year, because often you look to the market-leading brands, the biggest brands in the game who have the most to lose, as to where are we really in terms of trend and popularity. And seeing Rolex this year release a vintage themed watch called the 1908, which was inspired by watches from the 1930s. This is a huge bellwether for the industry, because when Rolex does something, it's after everyone else has done it, you know, sometimes well, sometimes failing. When Rolex do it, you know that it's on the map as a trend. So that 1908 tells me that this whole topic of neo-vintage is the hottest topic of the fair.
But really interesting, because we are now back to talking about neo-vintage rather than just classic and vintage.
It isn't a revival of an old model, which is very telling.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the Cellini was a platform for Rolex to have those, again, classic wristwatch models, not very successful. So they've pivoted away from that towards the 1908, which has elements of the Cellini, like the coin bezel classic watches, but it's taken elements from a lot of watches in a way that makes it neo-vintage almost to the definition.
Well, thank you, Bella. Before you go, thank you for inviting me to this show.
No, we're not finished. We've got plenty more.
Well, no, I know that, but what I'm saying is that I've learned so much more in this last 10 minutes from Andrew than I have in the last 2 Watches and Wonders that I've been here.
Jeremy here is selling our show. This is what we do. This is what we do here on The Late Show.
So I don't need to come to the next Watches and Wonders. I'll just give you a shout.
What do you want to know? Let's do it.
Exactly.
hang on. We've still got a little bit more. Well, just picking up on what Andrew there was saying there about it's not a revival. You know, these aren't revivals of old watches. And of course, for newer houses, it's easier because they can't go back to their back catalogue and find something from 100 years ago and revive that. So it's got to be something new.
Take it, Charles Zuber.
Yeah.
Charles Zuber it's a new house.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to.
He has no history to pull back on. Okay. But he has been able to create something that is what I would call neo-vintage. Without 100%. A doubt, out of all these watches, that is the most neo-vintage of the whole lot.
Why?
Oh boy, it takes me back emotionally back to the 60s.
Yeah.
You know? But yet it has a modern touch to it, modern feel, modern material.
Those polished triangular indexes.
There you go. There you go.
I'm stopping you from talking too long about one watch because we're not allowed to do that on this show. No, okay. I love it, but we're not allowed to do it.
Okay. Let me throw in a house then, a new house as well.
Yeah, go on.
So let's talk about Speak Marine, right? This is another new house.
Right.
They've taken, and yet their design codes are constructed of components that are all very classic, like an onion crown, a lacquered dial. You know, we have these classic watchmaking tropes in his design, and yet we have this. I'm going to get the name right. It's the black and white
black tie.
Academic black tie.
Yes.
Yeah, I needed that to just roll off the tongue. The academic black tie takes these elements, but puts them in a very modern context of a black watch and a white watch. It has a running seconds at 1:30, which is just very perpendicular and strange. But it's again a new house with vintage touches, doing this super modern black and white iteration in 2 sizes, which again plays to the West African market and the Australian market.
And it's got Big Ben on the hands, which obviously appeals to me as a Brit.
Yes.
Let's talk about how we distinguish classic watches, because of course you can't distinguish it by complications. By definition, a classic watch isn't going to have complications. How do houses differentiate their classic watches one from the other, Jeremy?
Look, it could be a matter of color. It could be dial color. A house can sometimes be represented by a color throughout its entire range, you know. If you look at, I look at some of these watches here. The Zenith, for example. The Zenith, I happen to know Zenith because I work with Zenith, and I love this new product that they've brought in. It's a very classic, and it's typical Zenith. So how do you distinguish in the houses? It's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing because a lot of them are much the same.
Yeah. What about you, Andrew? How do you think they might?
Well, like each house has its own classic and its own classic iconic period that it's known for. Apart from the younger brands who are forging their way, but Zenith is known for high frequency chronographs and also known for a period of like bracelet design. Like this we're talking here about the the Zenith Shadow Revival, which
Correct.
has a ladder bracelet, and which is a very kitsch design actually, and it's made in microblasted titanium. So you take this classic element, but put it in a new material. You mentioned colour, really,
Yes.
as a great comment, because in actual fact you combine colour with new materials, and then you are stepping well away from the past and taking a classic design into the future.
Are there any colours that have stood out to you whilst you've been walking around so far? Any colours you think, oh, that could be something new?
Interestingly,
yeah.
yeah. Look,
Sorry, I'm asking you both at the same time. I'm
Yeah,
going to go to.
it is both of us at the same time because we like to chat and have a banter.
We do.
What have you seen?
Look, it's interesting that in other years, there's been so little to talk about some years that we will say, oh, this is a purple year, or this is a green year, or this is a blue year. Whereas for me, there's been so much activity and there's been so much, I would say, there's been macro shifts that the whole colour conversation is gone.
Correct.
You know,
Correct.
but I would think if I was going to choose a colour, I would say that the green is still reverberating through collections.
The green has been the standout colour through the exhibition.
And when we say green, we mean like a vibrant, bright green, rather.
Not necessarily. No.
Interesting.
No,
good.
not at all.
What green are you talking about?
It's been more of forest green.
Yes.
It's been more of forest green. It's been more a bit of a racing green, a bit of the British green. This is what I've seen coming through. Not
See,
very,
I'm a different green. I'm in a whole different forest. I'm talking sage. I'm talking olive. I'm talking khaki.
Oh, there you go. That's
but
yeah.
a lot of green.
Yeah, so mirroring interior design, if
Yeah.
I might.
Sage.
What about ultra thin? Ultra thin used to be a big differentiator of classic watches. Is that still a thing here at the salon?
Well, I'm not sure that we can even say ultra thin classic because if we go back last year to Bulgari Ultra, we wouldn't really call that a classic watch, but it's the thinnest watch that has been produced.
Until the Richard Mille.
Which is also not really a classic
I know.
watch. You know, so I think that ultra thin part with the classic or with the vintage is long gone.
Okay.
You know, I think the vintage is Andrew, you know, as I've said, I've learned so much in the last 10 minutes, you know, as Andrew said, you know, the vintage now is differentiated by a lot of different things other than the size.
Yeah.
Other than the thinness, not the size, because I've said several times 37 starts to get
See, I have
vintage.
a twist on this. I have a twist on
Yeah,
your
go
question.
ahead.
Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
So, the race for thin was absolutely red hot in 2022 when we had Bulgari breaking the record with the Ultra Finissimo, which is the most extraordinary watch. And then we had Richard Mille with basically a credit card and saying, well, we beat it by a couple of mil. This year, to me, the thin topic is the fact that because watches are getting smaller in diameter, like the Tudor Black Bay 54, I get this mixed up because it's 37 millimeters, but it's from 1954, which was the first ever Tudor dive watch. But the Black Bay 54 in 37 mil is the beauty of getting a smaller, because I'm starting to favour smaller watches. I'm not wearing one today, but what appeals to me about the 37 mil Tudor and what makes me want one, aside from seeing Beckham wearing it, which is, it always works on me. It's meant to work on women. It works on me. But it's that when you get a smaller diameter, you get a thinner watch, and therefore you get a more comfortable wear. So it moves out of the absolutely absurd kind of space race for a watch that thin to something that is really meaningfully, and I would say, you know, comfortably thin, which is, for example, the Tudor.
And across the board smaller. I'm really sorry because we have to wrap the show. We've already gone over our time.
Before you wrap that
Come on,
show,
you've got 10 seconds.
I've got 10
You've
seconds.
got 10 seconds.
You know, we spent all this time talking, but the classic watch for women, nobody's mentioned anything. What's the definition of classic for women? None of everything that we've said here, actually.
I'm sorry, I would have thought it was the same. Don't ask me, I'm not the watch expert.
Very, very different.
Well, I tell you what, and actually, do you know what? This is going to lead wonderfully to tomorrow. Thank you. You guys have really actually led on beautifully to tomorrow because tomorrow's show is all about ladies' watches. So we will be talking about that.
See you tomorrow.
I tell you what, Andrew, I know that will be with two ladies.
I know a lot about ladies' watches.
Andrew McCutcheon and Jeremy Ajidawan, thank you so much for being here with us on The Late Show. As I said, tomorrow, all about ladies' watches. We will have two female journalists, two female watch enthusiasts with us here in the studio who've been sniffing out the best stories from the salon for us. Please do join us then, same time, 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. Bye.